The sun had barely started to rise over Los Angeles when Keanu Reeves stepped out of a quiet black sedan in front of one of Beverly Hills' most luxurious hotels. The early morning air was cool, and a faint mist clung to the trees lining the driveway. The tall glass doors of the hotel reflected the city's glow, sleek, expensive, and proud of it. Keanu looked up at the entrance for a moment, taking in the polished marble steps and golden handles. He wasn't dressed like the usual guests who arrived there. He wore a faded leather jacket, dark jeans, and a pair of boots that had clearly seen better days. A simple silver cross hung around his neck, glinting faintly when a ray of sunlight caught it. He wasn't there for publicity, a meeting, or an event. He had come to take a short break, a quiet weekend away from the noise of movie sets, interviews, and crowds. It wasn't unusual for him to choose simple things even when surrounded by luxury. He preferred peace over attention, sincerity over glamour. When he stepped inside, the lobby greeted him with silence, broken only by the faint sound of a piano playing somewhere in the background. The floors shone like glass, the chandeliers sparkled, and the air carried the scent of expensive perfume mixed with fresh flowers. A young bellboy noticed him first. "Good morning, sir. May I help you with your bags?" Keanu smiled politely. "Thank you, but it's just this one." He carried a small black duffel bag. Nothing fancy, just enough for a couple of days. The bellboy nodded and led him to the front desk. The receptionist, a woman with perfect posture and a practiced smile, looked up as he approached. "Good morning. Do you have a reservation with us?" she asked, her voice calm but distant, as if she had already decided he wasn't their typical guest. "Yes," Keanu said gently. "It should be under Reeves." She typed for a moment, and then her expression shifted. "Ah, Mr. Reeves, welcome." Her tone softened slightly, but not enough to hide her surprise. It wasn't every day that a man dressed so simply walked into their five-star hotel. "Your suite is ready," she said. "Would you like someone to assist you with your luggage?" "No, thank you." "I'll manage," Keanu replied. The manager, Douglas, stood a few feet away, watching. He was tall, immaculately dressed, and carried himself with the kind of pride that often comes from working in a place where appearances mean everything. His sharp eyes moved from Keanu's boots to his jacket, and then stopped on the small cross hanging from his neck. Douglas frowned. He had dealt with many wealthy guests, politicians, CEOs, celebrities, and most of them loved to flaunt their wealth. But this man looked more like someone passing through, not someone who belonged. Keanu didn't notice the stare. He simply took his room key, thanked the receptionist, and headed toward the elevator. The suite was on the top floor, quiet, elegant, and filled with soft natural light. He placed his bag near the sofa, took a deep breath, and looked out over the city skyline. He smiled faintly. For the first time in months, he could finally rest. Later that morning, he decided to grab breakfast in the hotel restaurant. It was a place known for its grand chandeliers, gold-rimmed plates, and guests who liked to be seen. Keanu walked in quietly, greeting the hostess with a friendly nod. "Good morning," he said. "Is there a quiet corner where I can sit?" The hostess smiled politely and led him to a table by the window. He ordered black coffee, scrambled eggs, and toast, simple food for a simple man. As he waited, he looked around the restaurant. People were dressed sharply, talking in low voices about business, investments, and vacations. The clinking of cutlery and soft jazz filled the air. A few people recognized him, whispering his name under their breath. But Keanu didn't mind. He smiled at a couple who waved and went back to his breakfast. Douglas entered the restaurant shortly after. He was doing his usual morning rounds, ensuring everything looked perfect. His gaze moved across the room until it landed on Keanu again. He hesitated. Then his eyes narrowed at the sight of the silver cross gleaming against Keanu's dark shirt. Douglas approached the table with a stiff smile. "Good morning, sir. I hope you're enjoying your meal." Keanu looked up, polite as always. "Good morning." "Yes, thank you. Everything's great." Douglas shifted slightly, lowering his voice. "I couldn't help but notice your necklace," he said. "We usually ask guests to avoid wearing visible religious symbols in the restaurant. The hotel prefers to maintain a neutral image for all guests." Keanu blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "You mean the cross?" "Yes," Douglas said firmly. "We've had guests complain in the past. It's part of maintaining a balanced environment." Keanu paused for a moment, looking down at the small piece of silver resting on his chest. His voice stayed calm. "I understand," he said softly, "but it's something personal to me." "It's not meant to offend anyone." Douglas's tone hardened. "I'm sure you mean well, sir. But rules are rules. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to cover it or step out of the restaurant." A few guests nearby began to glance over, sensing the tension. Keanu's calm face didn't change. He wasn't angry, just quietly disappointed. He spoke in the same steady tone. "I'm sorry if it makes anyone uncomfortable. I've worn this for many years. It reminds me of someone I lost. It's not about showing off faith or anything like that." Douglas didn't budge. "I understand your sentiment, but I'm responsible for maintaining our standards. Please cooperate." The restaurant had gone quiet. Even the soft jazz seemed distant now. The waitress standing nearby looked uncomfortable. Keanu sighed quietly and smiled a little, not out of sarcasm, but out of sadness. "I don't want to cause any trouble," he said gently. "If this really is an issue, I can finish my breakfast elsewhere." He reached for his jacket and began to stand up, but before he could leave, an older couple at the next table turned to Douglas. The woman frowned. "Excuse me," she said. "That man has done nothing wrong. I don't think anyone here is offended by a small necklace." Douglas straightened. "Ma'am, I'm simply following policy." "Policy or not," the woman interrupted, "you're being rude." Other guests began to murmur. A young man across the room took out his phone, pretending to check messages but secretly recording the scene. Keanu noticed and shook his head slightly, a small gesture asking them not to escalate it. "Please," he said softly. "It's fine." He looked at Douglas again, still calm. "You're just doing your job." "I understand." Douglas gave a curt nod, though his jaw was tight. "Thank you for understanding, sir." Keanu left the restaurant quietly, leaving his half-finished breakfast behind. The murmurs followed him as he walked out, some sympathetic, some confused. When he reached the elevator, he paused for a moment. His reflection stared back at him in the golden doors, tired eyes, soft smile, and that small silver cross that had suddenly become a symbol of misunderstanding. He thought about how strange it was. In a place filled with luxury, something so small, so personal could cause so much discomfort. He wasn't angry, not really. He had seen far worse in life, and he knew that people often acted out of fear or pride. Still, a quiet heaviness sat in his chest. When he returned to his suite, he set his cross gently on the table beside his coffee cup and sat by the window. The city stretched endlessly before him, alive, loud, indifferent. He took a sip of water and smiled faintly to himself. "It's just a necklace," he whispered, but deep down he knew it wasn't about the cross. It was about how quick people were to judge what they didn't understand. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he felt that this moment, and as small and quiet as it seemed, was going to become something bigger. For now, though, he just sat there, watching the morning light fade into day, unaware that the small act of kindness and patience he showed that morning would soon travel far beyond those hotel walls. The morning had passed slowly after the quiet scene in the restaurant. Keanu stayed in his suite for a while, sipping coffee and trying to let the awkward moment fade from his mind. He wasn't someone who liked conflict. Over the years, he had learned to stay calm, no matter what people said or did. He sat by the window again, watching the city move below him, cars streaming like ants, people walking with purpose, the hum of life continuing as if nothing had happened. Inside that beautiful hotel, however, a different kind of silence hung in the air. The restaurant staff whispered among themselves after he left. Some felt sorry. Others felt nervous because they had seen Douglas confront someone who, though dressed simply, clearly carried himself with quiet dignity. The young waitress who had served Keanu felt especially uncomfortable. She knew the man had done nothing wrong. Douglas, on the other hand, didn't think twice about it. In his mind, he had simply done his job. The hotel was famous for its strict standards. Guests were expected to look elegant, behave a certain way, and blend with the luxury around them. He didn't care who Keanu was. He saw only a man wearing a symbol that didn't match the neutral image the hotel liked to project. But soon, whispers began to spread. Around lunchtime, a couple who had witnessed the exchange uploaded a short video clip to social media. It wasn't long, just a few seconds showing Douglas speaking sharply to Keanu, and Keanu responding calmly, telling him he meant no harm. The clip ended with Keanu walking out quietly, his small silver cross catching the light as he left. Within hours, the video began to circulate online. At first, it was shared by a few people who recognized him. "That's Keanu Reeves," one caption read. "He was asked to cover his cross at a luxury hotel. Look how respectful he stays," others started commenting. "That's unbelievable," one wrote. "He didn't even raise his voice." The video spread faster than anyone at the hotel could imagine. By the afternoon, several news pages and fan accounts had already reposted it. People began tagging the hotel's official account, demanding an explanation. Inside the hotel, Douglas finally realized what was happening when one of the staff members showed him a phone screen. "Sir," the receptionist whispered nervously, "you should see this." He took the phone and frowned as the video played. The sound was clear enough to hear every word he said. His face tightened as he saw himself ordering a guest, now obviously a famous actor, to hide his necklace. "This is out of context," Douglas muttered. He's a celebrity. People always twist things online. But deep down he knew how bad it looked. His tone in the video was cold. His posture was harsh. And Keanu's calm, kind responses made the contrast even more striking. By early evening, reporters were calling the hotel for comments. Guests had started murmuring about the incident. Some even approached the front desk, asking if it was true that someone had been asked to remove a cross. Meanwhile, Keanu had no idea what was happening online. He wasn't on social media much. He spent the afternoon walking around the city, visiting a small bookstore, grabbing a sandwich at a quiet cafe, and stopping by a local park. People greeted him politely, some asking for photos, which he always agreed to with his usual gentle smile. When he returned to the hotel that evening, the atmosphere felt different. He could sense it the moment he stepped inside. The bellboy who had helped him earlier looked nervous. The receptionist gave a strained smile. "Good evening, Mr. Reeves," she said quickly. "I hope your day went well." "It did," Keanu replied. "Thank you." He noticed her hands tremble slightly as she typed. Something was clearly going on, but he didn't ask. He wasn't one to seek drama. He went up to his suite, unaware that millions of people had already watched his quiet act of patience that morning. By nighttime, the video had reached international news platforms. Articles appeared with titles like "Keanu Reeves Humiliated at Beverly Hills," "Hotel for Wearing a Cross and Actor Shows Grace Under Pressure After Being Publicly Shamed," comment sections flooded with messages of support. Fans from all over the world praised his calm reaction. "He could have shouted or walked out angrily," one comment said, "but he handled it with class. He's always been humble," another wrote. Even when people treat him unfairly. The hotel's management held an emergency meeting the next morning. The general manager, a woman named Mrs. Turner, looked furious. She threw a printed news article on the table in front of Douglas. "Do you realize what this has done to our image?" she snapped. "We're all over the internet. People are calling us intolerant and disrespectful." Douglas tried to defend himself. "I was just following policy," he said. "We have a rule about visible symbols." "Policy or not," she said sharply, "you publicly embarrassed one of the most respected actors in the world in front of other guests. Do you have any idea how much damage that causes?" Douglas's face turned red. "I didn't know who he was." "That's not the point," she said. "You shouldn't treat anyone that way, no matter who they are." She leaned back, rubbing her forehead. "He hasn't said anything publicly yet, thank God. But this story is everywhere. People are canceling reservations." Douglas sat in silence, his confidence shrinking by the minute. Back upstairs, Keanu was having breakfast alone in his suite when his phone buzzed. His assistant, who had been trying to reach him, finally got through. "Keanu," she said, her voice half amused, half worried. "Have you seen the news?" He frowned slightly. "No, what's going on?" "Someone filmed you at the hotel yesterday." "It's all over the internet," he paused. "Filmed me?" "Yes. The part where that manager asked you to cover your necklace. People are angry about how they treated you. You're trending everywhere." Keanu sighed softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I see. Don't worry," she continued quickly. "Everyone's supporting you. They're calling it an example of kindness and patience, but the hotel's getting a lot of backlash." He stayed quiet for a moment, staring out the window. The morning light hit the silver cross still hanging around his neck. "I didn't want this," he said finally. "I just wanted to eat breakfast." "I know," she said gently. But maybe it's a good thing. People are talking about respect and tolerance because of it. He smiled faintly. Maybe. Downstairs, the hotel phones kept ringing. News reporters waited outside, hoping to get a statement. Some guests checked out early, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. Douglas avoided eye contact with everyone. His co-workers whispered as he passed, and he could feel their judgment. He tried to tell himself he was right, that rules were rules. But deep down, guilt began to creep in. By the afternoon, Keanu decided to go down and speak to the front desk. He didn't want anyone to lose their job over a misunderstanding. When he reached the lobby, Mrs. Turner was there, looking exhausted. She straightened immediately when she saw him. "Mr. Reeves," she said quickly, "I'm deeply sorry for what happened yesterday. That should never have occurred. Please know that it doesn't reflect our values as a hotel." Keanu nodded, his tone soft. "I appreciate that. I understand mistakes happen. We've been receiving a lot of calls," she admitted. "People are upset. We're taking it very seriously." He looked at her for a moment, then smiled gently. "I'm not here to make trouble for anyone. I just hope everyone learns something from this, to treat people kindly no matter what they wear." She exhaled, relieved. "Thank you for being so understanding." Keanu gave a polite nod, then turned to leave. As he walked through the lobby, guests watched him with quiet admiration. Some whispered his name, but he kept his eyes down, humble as always. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Douglas sat alone in his office, reading the latest headlines. He felt the weight of his choices settle on his shoulders. In the next room, the staff gathered around their phones watching the video again, not to gossip, but to remind themselves of the simple truth that had been so easy to forget. Kindness matters more than image. And somewhere upstairs, Keanu sat by the window once again, holding the same cross between his fingers. The city lights shimmered outside like tiny stars. He smiled faintly, thinking about how life had a strange way of turning quiet moments into lessons for everyone to see. The next morning began quietly, but the world outside the hotel was far from calm. What had started as a short video clip had now turned into a global conversation. People were talking everywhere, on social media, on television, and even in news headlines around the world. The video of Keanu's calm reaction had spread faster than anyone expected. It wasn't just a story about a celebrity being treated unfairly. It became a story about dignity, kindness, and the power of staying humble even when you're wronged. People admired the way he had handled the situation. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't argued, and hadn't tried to embarrass anyone in return. He had simply walked away with quiet grace. That calmness spoke louder than anger ever could. By now, the hotel was receiving hundreds of messages from the public. Some were angry, some disappointed, and others simply urging the hotel to apologize. Several guests canceled their bookings, saying they couldn't stay at a place that disrespected people for what they believed in. Inside the hotel, everyone was on edge. Staff whispered in corners. The phones never stopped ringing, and Douglas, the manager who had started it all, felt the pressure building like a storm he couldn't escape. He hadn't spoken to Keanu since that morning in the restaurant. He didn't even dare look him in the eye when they crossed paths in the lobby. Guilt had started to eat at him. He didn't want to admit it, but deep down he knew he had been wrong. Keanu, on the other hand, remained calm as always. He continued his quiet stay, treating the staff kindly, greeting everyone with his usual smile. He didn't demand anything special or act offended. In fact, when some staff members apologized to him personally, he simply told them not to worry. One afternoon, while Keanu was sitting in the lounge reading a book, a small group of people approached him. It was the same family who had filmed the video. They looked nervous, unsure if they should disturb him. The father spoke first. "Mr. Reeves, I just wanted to say we're sorry for what happened that day. We didn't mean for things to get out of hand. We just felt it wasn't right how they treated you." Keanu closed his book gently and smiled. "You don't have to apologize. You did what you thought was right." The man nodded. "Still, it's gone everywhere now. Everyone's talking about it." Keanu chuckled softly. "Yes, I've heard. I didn't plan for that to happen." His tone was warm, his eyes kind. The family could see that he truly meant what he said. There was no trace of anger or pride in him, only quiet understanding. As they spoke, some guests nearby watched with curiosity. To them, It was incredible how someone as famous as Keanu Reeves could sit in a hotel lobby and talk like an ordinary person, without pretense or ego. Later that evening, he went for a walk outside the hotel. The city air felt cool and refreshing. A few people recognized him on the street and called out his name, thanking him for being a good man. He just smiled and waved back. Meanwhile, inside the hotel, Douglas sat in his office staring at his computer screen. Every news site seemed to have the same headline about the incident. He scrolled through hundreds of comments, most of them criticizing his behavior. He leaned back in his chair and sighed heavily. His pride had always been his strength, but now it felt like a heavy weight on his chest. He thought about the way Keanu had looked at him, not with anger, but with quiet disappointment. That look was harder to face than any insult. That night, Douglas barely slept. He kept replaying the moment in his head. His words, his tone, his arrogance. He had been so focused on rules and image that he had forgotten the simplest rule of all, to treat people with respect. The next morning, he made a decision. He waited until he heard Keanu was having breakfast in the dining room. Then he straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and walked in. The room grew quieter as he approached the table. Keanu looked up, surprised but not unkindly. "Good morning," he said softly. Douglas cleared his throat. "Mr. Reeves, may I have a moment of your time?" Keanu nodded. "Of course." Douglas stood there for a second, unsure how to begin. Then he said, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong to speak to you the way I did. It was unprofessional and it was unkind. I thought I was doing my job, but I realize now that I let my judgment get in the way of basic respect." The restaurant was quiet enough that everyone could hear. Some of the staff stopped moving for a moment, their eyes fixed on the scene. Keanu set down his fork and smiled faintly. "Thank you for saying that. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong." Douglas nodded, his voice low. "You handled the situation far better than I did. I learned a lesson I should have learned long ago." Keanu looked at him thoughtfully for a moment. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after them." Douglas swallowed hard. "I'm truly sorry, sir." Keanu extended his hand. Apology accepted. The handshake was brief but sincere. For the first time in days, Douglas felt like he could breathe again. The guilt that had been weighing him down began to lift, replaced by something he hadn't felt in years: humility. After Douglas left, the restaurant slowly returned to normal. But the people who had witnessed the moment wouldn't forget it. They saw that true respect wasn't about power or position. It was about admitting when you've been wrong and choosing kindness instead of pride. Later that afternoon, Keanu's assistant visited the hotel to discuss the growing media attention. "They're asking for a statement," she told him. "Everyone wants to know your side of the story." Keanu thought for a moment before answering. "If I say anything, I want it to be about kindness, not blame." He wrote a short message and sent it to his publicist to share online. It read, "No one should ever feel embarrassed for what they believe in. Kindness and respect go a long way, even in moments of misunderstanding. I hope this reminds us all to treat each other better." Within minutes, his message was everywhere. People praised him even more, not just for staying calm during the incident, but for responding with grace afterward. His words became a quote that spread across social media, printed on photos, shared in comments, and even used in articles about compassion and respect. At the hotel, Mrs. Turner read his message and shook her head in disbelief. "What a man," she whispered. "Even after everything, he still shows kindness." Douglas read it too. It hit him hard. He knew those words were for everyone, including him. He decided then that he would never treat anyone that way again, no matter what rules or image the hotel wanted to keep. That evening, Keanu checked out quietly. The staff lined up at the front desk, hoping to say goodbye. He thanked each of them personally. When it was Douglas's turn, he stepped forward nervously. "I know this doesn't make up for what happened," Douglas said, "but I wanted to say thank you for showing me what real respect looks like." Keanu smiled. "Take care of your team. People remember kindness more than perfection." Then he picked up his small duffel bag, the same one he had arrived with, and they walked out through the glass doors into the golden sunset. The staff stood there watching. As the car drove away, for a long moment no one said a word. A few days later, the hotel released a public apology, promising to review its policies and train staff to treat all guests equally. People slowly began to forgive, but the lesson stayed with everyone who had seen what happened. And for Douglas, that lesson became personal. He realized that one brief moment of judgment had nearly cost him his integrity, but one man's humility had given him a second chance. As for Keanu, he returned to his quiet life away from the noise, the fame, and the cameras. He didn't dwell on what had happened. To him, it was just another reminder that sometimes the simplest gestures, patience, forgiveness, kindness, can reach farther than any grand speech ever could. He didn't know that somewhere, across the world, millions of people were still sharing his story, using his calmness as an example of how to respond to cruelty with grace. And though he never sought the spotlight for it, he had once again inspired people, not through a movie, not through fame, but through something much greater, the quiet strength of a good heart. After Keanu left the hotel, silence lingered for days. The place that once bustled with high-profile guests and polite laughter now felt strangely empty. The staff moved quietly, speaking in hushed tones, still thinking about what had happened. Even though the hotel had issued a public apology, the damage had already been done. People online continued to discuss the story. News anchors replayed the video, social media users posted about it daily, and journalists analyzed every moment of that quiet breakfast scene. The hotel's reputation began to sink. Regular guests canceled their upcoming reservations, some writing that they didn't want to stay in a place that disrespected people for expressing their beliefs. For Mrs. Turner, the general manager, it was a nightmare. Every day, she received angry emails and calls from longtime customers. The PR team worked day and night, trying to calm the situation. But no amount of polished statements could erase what people had seen with their own eyes. Douglas came into work every morning with heavy steps. His confidence was gone. He had always taken pride in running a perfect establishment, but now he felt like he had failed everyone, including himself. He noticed the way other employees looked at him. Some were sympathetic, others judgmental. A few avoided speaking to him altogether. But the worst part was knowing that he deserved the discomfort. He had made the mistake that started it all. One afternoon he sat in his office, staring at the framed certificates on the wall. Awards for excellence, professionalism, leadership. They now felt meaningless. None of those awards had taught him what a single moment of humility from Keanu Reeves had shown him. He sighed deeply and rubbed his forehead. "What have I done?" he whispered to himself. Outside his office, the staff were gathered in small groups, quietly discussing new rumors. It was said that the hotel's corporate owners were sending a team to investigate the situation. There was talk that someone might lose their job. Later that evening, Douglas received an email from the head office. He was asked to attend an official meeting the next morning regarding the incident and its impact. He didn't need anyone to tell him what that meant. He barely slept that night. The next morning, he sat in the meeting room with Mrs. Turner and two executives from the main company. Their expressions were serious. One of them, a man with gray hair and a calm but firm tone, began speaking. "Mr. Douglas, we've reviewed the situation. We've seen the footage, read the reports, and looked at the public reaction. This incident has affected our image severely." Douglas nodded quietly. "I understand, sir," Mrs. Turner added softly. "We all know you didn't mean for it to happen. But the truth is, your actions went against everything our brand stands for." "I know," Douglas said, his voice low. "I made a mistake. I spoke without thinking. I judged someone by appearance and forgot that everyone deserves respect." The gray-haired executive looked at him carefully. "We appreciate your honesty, but we also have to think of the company's future. We can't keep you in your current position." Douglas felt a sharp ache in his chest, but he didn't argue. He had known this was coming. He nodded again. "I understand. I accept the decision." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Mrs. Turner said softly, "You're a good man, Douglas. But sometimes one wrong decision can change everything." He stood up, thanked them for the opportunity, and walked out. As he passed through the lobby, the staff turned to look at him. Some whispered words of comfort, others stayed silent. He simply smiled weakly and said, "Take care of each other. That's what matters." When he stepped outside the hotel, the air felt heavy but strangely peaceful. He didn't feel angry or bitter. Deep down, he knew this was a lesson he had needed for a long time. Meanwhile, Keanu was far from the chaos. He had returned to his normal life, avoiding interviews and ignoring the noise online. He didn't like the attention. For him, the story wasn't about fame or being right. It was about how people treat one another when no one is watching. He continued his daily routine, spending time with friends, working quietly on his upcoming film, and occasionally visiting a local coffee shop where the barista always smiled when he came in. But everywhere he went, someone would mention the incident. Strangers thanked him for his calmness, and even young people said they had learned something from the way he handled it. One day, while waiting in line at a bookstore, a teenager approached him shyly. "Mr. Reeves," she said softly, "I saw that video of you at the hotel. I just wanted to say, you made me think about how I treat people." Keanu smiled warmly. "That means a lot. We all have moments where we can choose kindness. I'm glad it made a difference." The girl grinned and nodded before walking away. Moments like that made him realize how far a single act of patience could reach. Back at the hotel, days turned into weeks. The management tried to repair the damage by offering discounts, running campaigns about respect and diversity, and retraining the staff. Slowly, guests started returning, but something had changed forever. Not just the hotel's image, but the people inside it. Mrs. Turner became more open with her staff, encouraging them to speak kindly to every guest regardless of how they looked or dressed. The bellboy who had greeted Keanu began to tell new employees about the day a famous man taught them what humility really looks like. And Douglas, though no longer part of the hotel, found his life taking an unexpected turn. After losing his job, he spent several weeks reflecting on what had happened. He didn't rush to find new work. Instead, he volunteered at a local shelter that helped people get back on their feet. At first it was hard. He wasn't used to serving meals or cleaning tables. But over time, he started to enjoy it. He met people from all walks of life, some poor, some broken, some simply lost. And for the first time in years, he began to listen. He learned to look at people not as clients or guests, but as human beings with stories and pain of their own. One afternoon, as he handed a plate of food to a man who looked tired but grateful, Douglas felt something shift inside him. He realized that losing his job had given him something much more valuable: empathy. He still remembered Keanu's words. "What matters is what we do after our mistakes." And now, he understood what that truly meant. Months later, he got a call from Mrs. Turner. She told him the hotel had made a full recovery and that the company had implemented new policies inspired by the whole experience. "Your story changed us," she said. "Even though it was painful, it made everyone better." Douglas smiled. "Maybe that's how lessons work," he replied. "They hurt before they help." That same week, he read a small article online about Keanu's recent charity work. It mentioned that Keanu had donated a large sum to a community fund in Los Angeles, in the name of every worker who learns to lead with kindness. Douglas sat back in his chair, stunned. He didn't need anyone to tell him what that meant. It was Keanu's quiet way of turning something painful into something good. He felt his throat tighten and whispered to himself, "Thank you." Meanwhile, Keanu never mentioned the incident again in interviews. When asked about it, he only said, "Sometimes people just need understanding. We all make mistakes. The world's already hard enough. Kindness doesn't cost anything." Those words, simple but sincere, stayed with people long after the story faded from the headlines. And though the hotel eventually regained its shine, it was never quite the same. Every new employee learned about that morning, not as a scandal, but as a story about humility, patience, and second chances. Douglas, now working full-time at the shelter, often told new volunteers the same thing he had once learned the hard way. Respect isn't about where someone stands. It's about how you see them when they have nothing to prove. Life had come full circle, for the hotel, for Douglas, and for everyone who had witnessed that quiet act of grace. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, Keanu kept living as he always had, simple, kind, and human, reminding the world through his actions that the smallest gestures of respect can create the biggest change. Time passed, and the story that had once dominated the internet slowly began to fade from the headlines. New topics took over the news, and the viral video that had sparked global attention was now just another memory in the endless stream of online content. But for the people who had lived through it, Keanu, Douglas, and everyone at that hotel, the lesson stayed deep inside their hearts. Keanu continued his quiet life as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He never enjoyed fame for its own sake. He had always believed that how a person treats others says far more about them than their achievements ever could. So even as people still occasionally mentioned the incident to him, he always responded with the same calm smile and a simple, kind answer. He was back to filming a small project, and not a blockbuster, but an independent movie with a modest crew. The set was peaceful, filled with laughter and a sense of teamwork. Keanu liked that kind of environment. No egos, no spotlight, just people working together to create something meaningful. During one of the breaks, one of the crew members approached him shyly. "Sir," the man said, "I just wanted to tell you that what you did, staying calm that day at the hotel, it really inspired me. I watched that video over and over again. You didn't argue or fight, but you made your point through your patience." Keanu smiled, looking a bit embarrassed by the compliment. "Thank you," he said softly. "But I didn't do anything special. I just didn't want to make things worse." "Anger never solves much," the man nodded. "Still, it changed how I think. Now, whenever someone gets rude with me, I try to stay calm instead of reacting." Keanu chuckled. "That's good. It's not easy, though." "It's not," the man agreed, "but it's worth trying." Those words stayed with Keanu. He had never meant for that morning in the hotel to become such a big deal, but knowing it had quietly changed the way others treated people, that meant something. Meanwhile, Douglas's life had completely transformed. Months after leaving the hotel, he had become a full-time volunteer at the shelter. What started as a temporary way to keep busy had become his true purpose. Every morning he helped serve meals, clean up, and talk to the people who came in. He learned their names, listened to their stories, and often found himself giving advice, not as a manager or a leader, but as someone who understood what it meant to fall and try to rise again. He no longer wore expensive suits or worried about titles. Instead, he wore a simple shirt with the shelter's logo on it and a name badge that read, "Douglas, Volunteer." It wasn't a fancy title, but it felt more meaningful than anything he'd ever had before. One rainy afternoon, as he was sorting food donations, a familiar face walked into the shelter. Douglas looked up, blinking in surprise. It was Keanu. He hadn't expected to see him again, not here, not after everything that had happened. For a moment, Douglas didn't know what to say. He wiped his hands on his apron and walked over slowly. "Mr. Reeves," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Keanu smiled warmly. "Just call me Keanu, and I didn't expect to be here either. I heard about this place from someone I met at a community event. They told me it's run by some really good people." Douglas nodded, a faint smile forming. "Well, we try our best." Keanu looked around the room, the volunteers serving food, the people chatting quietly at the tables, the warm smell of soup filling the air. "You've done something good here," he said. Douglas's throat tightened. "It helped me more than I helped it," he admitted. "After everything that happened, I needed a place to remind me what kindness really means." Keanu nodded slowly. "Funny how life works, isn't it? Sometimes the worst moments teach us the best lessons." Douglas smiled sadly. "You're right about that. I lost my job, my reputation, but maybe I gained something more important." They sat at one of the tables talking for a while. Douglas told him about how he had started volunteering, how meeting people at the shelter had changed his perspective on life. "Before," he said, "I thought success was about perfection, about everything looking polished and professional. But I was wrong. Success is about people. It's about treating others right, no matter where you are." Keanu listened quietly, nodding. "I'm glad you found peace in that," he said. There was a long pause filled with the soft sound of rain tapping against the windows. Then Keanu said something that surprised him. "You know, I made a donation to this place a few months ago. I didn't know you were part of it." Douglas's eyes widened. "That was you?" Keanu shrugged modestly. "It's a good cause. Places like this need support. I just wanted to help." Douglas smiled, his eyes glistening slightly. "Thank you," he said softly. "For everything, not just for this, but for the way you handled everything before. You could have destroyed me with one angry word, but you didn't. You gave me space to learn from my mistake." Keanu looked at him, his expression gentle. "We all deserve a second chance, Douglas. Nobody's perfect." For a moment they sat in silence. The sound of laughter and conversation filled the room, and the warmth of the shelter wrapped around them like a quiet comfort. After a while, Keanu stood up. "I should go," he said with a small smile. "But it was really good to see you again." Douglas stood too. "It was good to see you too," he said sincerely. "And if you ever want to come back, we'd be happy to have you volunteer with us." Keanu laughed softly. "I might just do that." He left soon after, but the moment stayed with Douglas long after the door closed behind him. He went back to his work that day with a lighter heart. It felt as though life had finally come full circle, from judgment to humility, from humiliation to understanding. Later that week, Keanu quietly arranged for more donations to be sent to the shelter. Food, supplies, and some funds to help renovate the old kitchen. He didn't tell anyone it was from him. He didn't want credit. He just wanted the people there to have what they needed. A few weeks later, the shelter put up a small plaque near the entrance that read, "For everyone who believes in kindness and second chances." They never mentioned names, but everyone who knew the story understood who it was meant for. Meanwhile, the hotel that had once been the center of the controversy had found its rhythm again. The staff were more relaxed now, kinder, more thoughtful. New guests often commented on how warm the place felt, not just elegant but human. Mrs. Turner often told her new employees about what happened that year. "We learned something the hard way," she would say. "No matter how big or small someone is, treat them with respect. You never know who might be teaching you a lesson in return." Douglas visited the hotel one last time, not as an employee but as a guest. Mrs. Turner greeted him warmly, and they talked over coffee in the lounge. The place felt different now, less rigid, more open. As he looked around, Douglas couldn't help but smile. The walls were the same, the chandeliers still sparkled, but something unseen had changed. The hotel now had heart. When he left, he walked past the restaurant where it had all begun. The same table where Keanu had sat that morning was still there near the window. Sunlight fell softly across it, and for a moment, Douglas stood there, remembering everything that had happened, the embarrassment, the lesson, the growth. He whispered quietly, "Thank you," before walking away. Back in his small apartment that night, Douglas sat by the window with a cup of tea. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and he thought about how life had taken him somewhere better than where he had started. And somewhere across the city, Keanu sat in his own quiet home looking at the same night sky. He didn't know what people were saying about him anymore, and he didn't care. All that mattered to him was knowing that maybe in some small way, he had helped someone choose kindness. The world would forget the headlines. The internet would move on. But the ripple of that one small act, staying calm when others weren't, would keep moving through people's hearts, changing how they saw one another. And that was enough.